All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lord Giddie, and I am a part of the digital teaching and learning team, and I am a senior learning experience designer. Essentially, what I do is I focus on accessibility types of issues. We try to learn as much as possible to share what we have learned. I'm also a professor, so I've had an opportunity to be able to teach both online, on ground, and blended. In addition to that, I've also worked as an instructional designer. So I've had an opportunity to be able to work with Canvas as well as other learning management systems. So I hope that we will be able to have a wonderful discussion. I will not assume that, or I will not claim to be an expert on this topic, but I am working extremely hard to become one. It's a topic that I care very, very deeply about. So today what I wanted to do was to provide you with an opportunity to explore with me some of the things that we can do in Canvas. And well before we put content in Canvas to make our courses more accessible. And a question might be, what exactly do we mean by that, right? What I mean by making our courses more accessible, particularly our online courses, I'm referring to making sure that before we even begin developing content, we ask ourselves a few basic questions. Number one, who are we designing for? What are their behaviors? What are their preferences? What are their habits? How do they access information? Do they access content using slow internet as an example? Do they utilize assistive technologies? And there are a variety of assistive technologies out there. So once we begin to ask these types of questions, we begin to see that failure to ask questions about individuals with diverse disabilities may lead us to develop content that is not inclusive and not accessible to everyone. So only inclusive or accessible to a few, or to some and exclusive to others. So one of the topics that we will cover today will be on universal design for learning. So right now I have open a Canvas course, and what we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, today is best practices for designing accessible learning environments. We will touch on universal learning principle, universal design for learning principles. We won't go too much into that, but we'll cover a little bit of that. We'll talk a little bit also about core principles, which are web content accessibility guidelines, but we'll speak to them in a more broader way. We won't go too deep into that because we only have a limited amount of time. But those are the topics that we'll definitely revisit over time. So what I have done here is that I've also made sure that we will talk about accessibility in Canvas in terms of format and structure, because obviously we are designing content in Canvas. Therefore, we must pay attention to both format and structure, because that's what speaks to whether our content is accessible or not. Within that spirit, we'll also touch on color, contrast, and hyperlinks, because also they also add to usability of content. For example, our ability to be able to visualize, see, interact with content. We'll also talk about images and the reason why we need to be able to provide additional information when we are utilizing non-text content. We'll also talk about tables. We use tables in a variety of contexts, so we'll touch on those. We'll also talk about audio and video, as well as accessible documents and third-party resources and tools. And finally, we will talk about accessibility tools. So let's take a dive. I'm going to go into accessibility, universal design for learning. So as I mentioned, I don't plan on going too deep into UDL, but I think as course designers, as instructors, as well as just educators in general, we have to take into consideration that we are tasked with developing or designing content for all users, not just a few, not just users who are fully abled, for lack of a better term, or users who are able to see or hear, right? So we should be able to think about individuals who perhaps utilize screen readers to access information. So those may include individuals who have hearing impairments, individuals who have different types of visual impairments, as well as other impairments, including cognitive impairments and motor impairments. So to me, universal design for learning, and I've provided some wonderful resources for you to be able to explore further. But to me, universal design for learning really means that before we even get started with putting content in Canvas, we have to, number one, make sure that we are looking at a variety of different types of materials so that content is delivered in multiple ways, in multiple formats. So avoiding to only rely on text-based content, right? Or if we are utilizing video as an example, to make sure that we are also including alternatives for that video. An alternative meaning making sure that we are including closed captions and a transcript to go along with that video. So again, it means making sure that we have specific and clear course expectations that are outlined and discussed. And in terms of an online course, making sure that we utilize the announcement page, which clearly is there and available for us to utilize as instructors, to make sure that at the beginning of the course, we are able to clearly state what the expectations are, what the key things are for students to be able to succeed in the course. So that also includes making sure that the syllabus document itself is accessible. And I know that for majority of you, you have been working with templates that have been reviewed and revised over time to make sure that they're accessible. And we continue to work with all of you to make sure that that the Word document is accessible. There are still some challenges, obviously, when you are working with a very large document, particularly where you're also utilizing tables to structure your content. But for the most part, we want to make sure that we continue to work on those documents before they enter Canvas so that they're accessible. So take a look at the UDL principles or framework so that you can be able to become familiar with what they represent. So in terms of accessibility and UDL, the idea really is to make sure that we are providing multiple means of representation, is to make sure that we are flexible in our design, meaning that we are, if we are utilizing assessments such as quizzes that require time for completion, that we take into account that some students may need additional time. It means that when we are creating those course overviews or module overviews with PowerPoint presentations, that we take the time to review the slides to make sure that they're accessible. So in addition to UDL, I think it's also important for us to take into account some of the other standards and principles that guide digital content. As some of you may know, for all institutions and organizations that function within the United States, there are laws, both federal and state laws, that govern what needs to happen in order to protect individuals from discrimination, as well as from exclusion. So in addition to those laws, there are also industry standards, and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are such standards. They are international in terms of scope and application. So what the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines offer is they provide a set of instructions, if you will, or guides, as well as helpful ways in which we can be helpful strategies for making sure that web content is accessible. And obviously, when we're working on an online course, which is based obviously online, we therefore need to make sure that we are also paying attention to some of those guidelines. The guidelines are summarized into 4 principles, and those principles are that web content must be perceivable, web content must be operable, and it must be understandable, and finally it must be robust. So briefly, what does that mean? For perceivable, it means that individuals must be able to perceive content. So as you can imagine, if you have video that is inaccessible and you have a student who has a disability, that might make it difficult for that student to perceive that content, obviously, because they're not able to access it. So that means that we include alternatives for audio and video content. It means that we provide captions as well as transcripts. It also means that we provide enough color and contrast, and we'll talk a little bit about what those things are. Operable means that we create content that allows users to access information using a variety of devices. So here we are speaking to making sure that content is keyboard accessible as an example. We are providing enough time to read and interact with content. It means that when we create content, we are utilizing the right type of structure to structure content. That means applying proper headings. So what does that mean? It means, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those things. It means making sure that instead of just manually creating your headings, you are using the built-in feature to be able to create those headings. Understandable. This means that you create content that is easy to understand, that is clear, that is concise. You make sure that navigation is easy and consistent across. And finally, robust. Here we are speaking directly to compatibility of the content with products, including assistive technology. So what that means is that we create content that can be accessible using different types of technologies, and some of those technologies might be reasonably outdated. So it also means making sure that assistive technologies can be able to pick up the content in a easier and meaningful way. So what we have covered thus far is UDL and the need to incorporate web accessibility guidelines in terms of the 4 principles. So with that taken into consideration, we also have to now ask ourselves, what exactly can we do, right? This is a big topic. Accessibility is a big topic. What can we do in Canvas, as an example, to improve accessibility for our courses? So the next section would be on accessibility in Canvas, format and structure. So as you follow along, in terms of headings, lists, here we are making sure that, as an example, your content is structured in a meaningful way so that individuals who are using assistive technologies such as screen readers can be able to quickly navigate from one section to another. So what does that look like in terms of those of you who may not have had an opportunity to be able to create headings? So as you can see here, this is our first heading. Typically, Canvas puts in the first heading, which is H1, and that would typically be here at the top. So this the first one that you put in as a designer or as a course creator, content creator, would be H2. So what you do is you'd simply just highlight the text, and over here, then you can be able to select the proper heading. What I would say is that you want to make sure that your headings maintain logical consistency. Most argue that we need to make sure that you start with H2 going down, that you don't skip the headings. Some people have argued that that doesn't really matter anymore, but I think it does matter to be able to maintain that consistency in terms of sequencing the headings. So here we have heading 2 and another example of heading 2 here. Here is heading 3, as you can see. You can be able to change them as you please. What I typically do as an instructional designer is that I also utilize different types of tools to see whether my content is structured in a meaningful way. And one of those tools, and I'll include that in the resources as well. If you can see it here, it's called Accessibility Insights. It's an add-on for Chrome, and I simply click on it. It's an automated tool. It can then show me the structure of my content in terms of the headings. I can then be able to see that, okay, there's H1, H2, H2, H3, H2, H3, and so on and so forth. So now I know exactly where my headings are, and I know that they're logically consistent. The other thing that I would also mention is making sure that you are using proper lists to structure your content. So lists can be both unordered, which would include bullet points, and then they can be ordered, which would be more of the numbering. And the numberings, obviously, you're using that for indicating that content is sequential in nature. So the issue here with lists is that there's a tendency for us sometimes to manually add in our own numbers and our own bullets. That can create an issue for individuals who are using a screen reader, because then the screen reader will not pick up that lists are being used in a document. So it's important to make sure that you are using the proper lists in Canvas. So again, if you look at the rich content editor here at the top, this is where you'd find your lists. And all you have to do is identify the content that you want to include in a list, and you can be able to just simply click on the list or on bullets or on the numbers. So that's on lists and headings. So then the next one that I would want to touch on briefly is color and contrast. And a lot of us do get in trouble when it comes to the use of color and contrast. I see this in some of our presentations in PowerPoint, that we sometimes, focus more on the decorative part of our presentation versus on the usability of our presentation. So in terms of color, the rule is that do not rely on color alone to convey meaning. So an example would be all green items are due on Monday, orange on Wednesday, and red on Friday. So clearly, somebody who's colorblind would not know, would not be able to perceive or understand these directions, because they won't be able to fully access the colors that we are using. Another concern with color is making sure that the foreground and background colors have enough that are different enough in terms of contrast. You don't want them to be too similar, because then it becomes very difficult to see, as you can see in our example here. So there are some resources for you in terms of how you can be able to assess color and contrast. So you can click on any of those to be able to see how to improve color and contrast. For most of us who are instructional designers, we obviously know more about the different types of color codes, but you can also easily just utilize Google and search for HTML color codes. They typically look something like this, if you can be able to see. But for those of you who are not able to obviously follow what I'm saying on the screen, I have provided some additional tools for color and contrast here as well. So the next one that I want to talk about are links. We use links a lot in terms of when we, as an example, in our readings and assignment page for some of our online courses, when we are linking a PDF as an example or a reading, we would typically use hyperlinks for that. So it's important to make sure that when we are hyperlinking, that we are providing enough context in terms of the title of the hyperlink. This will enable individuals, both with disabilities and without disabilities, to be able to understand where the link is taking them. So avoid phrases such as click here, hear more, or read more. So the proper way would be to, as I mentioned, provide a concise description of the content or the function of the link. To do so in Canvas, if you are not familiar with that, you simply would highlight the text as an example, and let's say you want to share this page. So you'd simply highlight the text and use this, and then you would have your link. We have also provided some additional tools and resources here as well. So we'll move on to images and alternative text. Images are wonderful, right? So pictures can tell great stories. They can summarize information. They can also be utilized to call for action. As an example, print a document, fax a document, or move to the next page or whatever it may be. But what we must understand with images is that for individuals who use screen readers are not able to fully review an image and interpret that image. So we need to be able to provide a description for the individual who's using a screen reader. There are different types of images that we utilize. So it's also important for us to be able to understand the reason why we are using an image and to be able to determine the proper description for that image. So in some cases, it might be an image that requires more than 120, 150 characters. And in that situation, we would need to provide a description for that image and make sure that all students or all users will be able to see that description or to view that description. So it will be, as an example, within the broader text. Another thing to take into consideration with non-text content, so broadly speaking, including other graphics, including illustrations, and other non-text content, we must be able to make sure that if it is there for a reason, as in students are supposed to maybe read a graph in a statistics course and then answer questions, we must make sure that that graphic is accessible to every student. So that might mean including a full description or another alternative way for students to fully engage with that image. So what we have here on the screen is an image. It's a picture of myself and Dr. Torres and other folks. We were in Pietermaritzburg in South Africa on a study abroad trip. So in this particular instance, we could say that this is a decorative image because it doesn't necessarily advance it does not necessarily add much to the content. But what I wanted to do here was to show you what you can be able to do with an image. So after you have uploaded your image, you would then click on the Rich Content Editor. And here where it says alternative text in this box, you would then include your description. And it's important to make sure that your description is concise. Imagine that somebody is telling you a very concise story where you are not there, you're somewhere else, and somebody is telling you something about something, and you want to be able to have a full understanding of that story or the point of that story. But you want to be concise. You want to stay within 120, some people say 150 characters. So once you have included that description, you can simply update. You can change the dimensions of the image. I know that Sean has also done some other presentations in terms of what you can do in terms of manipulating images. If he hasn't, we'll definitely have more time in the future to be able to talk about what you could do with an image. In terms of additional things to consider with images, we have a presentation here that we did, I believe it was a few weeks ago, that was more comprehensive. So feel free to be able to utilize that presentation as well. We have also provided some additional tools in terms of how to embed the image in Canvas, as well as a decision tree for differentiating between different types of images. Okay, let me have a sip of water.
Hey, Lord, I addressed a question in here. If we could just take a quick break. One question is there an accessible syllabus example that you could maybe share with people? Another question, I put it on an answer, but I want to get your take on it. For hyperlinks, backing up a little bit, is it helpful to identify in the text that it is a link, such as the link here to the website or whatever? My take I'll mention, what I responded was that my understanding is that a screen reader will identify if something's hyperlinked without you having to mention it. It automatically reads it as such, and that's why you don't want to have the hyperlink actually. The screen reader will read http://www. alphanumeric big long thing blah blah blah. It just wastes time, you know.
Yes.
And in Canvas, if you hyperlink something, it just, like what you see on the screen right there, it turns it blue, it underlines it. People know that's a universal sign that this is hyperlinked text, and so they might not need that. And then I mentioned that if you're hyperlinking an image or something that isn't text, it would probably be a good idea to mention stuff, because people don't intuitively think that all images are clickable or that something will happen. Anyway, your thoughts. You can elaborate on that if you have anything.
No, that is it. That's exactly it. You have covered it beautifully. In terms of an example of an accessible syllabus, I should have provided one, but I didn't. And there's a reason why. One of the reasons why is that, let me back up. I will find one, and I'll provide sort of an example of what that might look like. One of the concerns that personally, not speaking for our institutions, but personally, I feel that Google Docs tends to provide a better interface compared to when we utilize Microsoft as an example for Syllabus. I tend to prefer the Syllabus to be in HTML because it's a lot easier it's a lot more accessible. But because obviously we use Microsoft Word for our syllabus, I can after the call I can be able to provide additional insights in terms of some of the things that we could do for our syllabus to be more accessible. I know that TCSPP had started to work on improving accessibility of their syllabus templates, but the issue with templates is that obviously you provide somebody with a template and then they copy and paste content to that template, and sometimes things can be distorted or things can go in a different direction. But we'll definitely try to provide more examples of syllabus that is accessible. I know that's not the perfect answer, but that's the answer that I have. Okay, so in terms of tables, we utilize tables a lot in a variety of ways, including in our syllabus. Again, tables can be quite challenging for individuals who use a screen reader, but for the most part, technology has improved that if you have a table in your document or in your web page, if you are using a simple table structure such as the one here, where if you use your keyboard tab key, and you can be able to tab from the left cell all the way to the end, then an individual who's using a screen reader should be able to easily follow the content that's in the table. And that's assuming that information that's being put on a table is also put in such a way that it's easy to read and understand. And what I mean by that is that we are not using the table for layout. We are actually using table for the right reasons. What I mean by using a table for layout is using table to help us structure content. So instead of using a table, there are different ways in which you can be able to structure your content, including using multiple columns as an example. In HTML, in Canvas, there's also different ways, although it might require a little bit of knowledge of HTML. But yes, we definitely want to make sure that for our tables, that they are also accessible. So when you are creating content that includes a table, make sure that first of all, you identify the row header, and the Canvas accessibility checker can walk you through how to do that. It's also recommended that in some instances, I tend to agree with that, but that in most cases you should include a caption for your table. And again, that's something that Canvas accessibility checker can also help you troubleshoot. It's actually quite easy to be able to add that. So if you have never added a table in Canvas, it's simply utilizing the RC here. You can click on it, click on the table, and add whatever rows and columns you need. Then you can be able to add your content. Once you have added your content, then you can be able to specify the row header as well as including captions. I've included a how-to guide for you here, so you can be able to take a look at how you can be able to add that. So that's on tables. In a summary, keep it simple. Make sure that you include the proper headers. Sometimes it might be column headers, sometimes it may be row headers, but the most important thing is to make sure that you are able to provide you are able to identify the headers for your table. That information helps individuals who are using a screen reader to be able to better navigate a table. So in terms of video and audio, again, we did another presentation, I believe it was maybe 2 weeks ago, on audio and video presentations. But this is a big topic, and it's an important topic, especially now that we have, as a result of COVID-19, we are doing a lot more remotely, and there's a need for us to be able to make sure that when we're utilizing audio and video, whether video that we create or video that we select from somewhere else, to make sure that the video is accessible, that the media player is accessible, meaning that individuals can be able to press play, to pause, and to stop that media player. In terms of the video itself, if you are creating a video, to make sure that you prepare ahead of time, to make sure that you speak clearly, you speak in a way that everyone will be able to, most people will be able to follow what you are saying in terms of clarity. It means that create a transcript ahead of time so that you can then be able to provide that transcript. There are different ways in which you can be able to add closed captions to your videos. One of those ways is by utilizing Canvas Studio, which I believe Sean has also created a helpful guide that I should include here in terms of how you can go about including requesting captions in Canvas Studio. It's actually pretty easy. Let's see if we can be able to. I don't know if this one already has captions, but what you would do is you would click on captions after you have uploaded your video. You would select the language. Because I've already have captions here, you select the language and let Canvas do its thing. So it's relatively easy to do. What I would mention is that for closed captions to be considered accessible, there must be about 99% or more in terms of accuracy. Canvas does not reach that level. I believe it's probably lingering around 76, 78% accuracy. That means that you then would need to go back in and revise your captions. So you'd simply go back to your captions and click edit, and then you can be able to go in and edit. You can play your video while you are editing as well. But one of the things that I also wanted to mention in terms of video and our use of video is that this video actually here is from one of our databases. I don't particularly like the example that I included here in terms of not the video content itself, but the way that it looks on my screen. I think the best thing would be maybe to just include a link such as this one here. I think it looks better. And I think it's also a good way of, let me pause the video. I think it's good in the sense that then your students would be able to have access to a transcript. They'll be able to have access to how to cite the video, how to share the video. But if you wanted to include it within Canvas, you can do so. But I would always make sure that I include a link to that video as well. What else can I say about this? Yeah, and you can be able to, what I did here is that I shared the video via the embed code, which was simply to copy the embed code and add it to Canvas. So I'm mentioning this because we have a very huge library in terms of audio and video resources. And so I would like to encourage all of us to make sure that before we look for third-party videos on YouTube and other platforms, that we utilize the library system for those resources. The key is that most of those resources will have the accessibility elements already added. So as I mentioned, there's a more comprehensive presentation here. as well as some other additional resources. I know that as a system, we need to have additional answers when it comes to live video in terms of conferencing, such as what we're having here today. Typically, not typically, in the most ideal situation, we should have live closed captions as we present, so that everyone will be able to access what we are discussing. But that is a conversation that we continue to have. I'll hurry up a little bit because obviously we don't have all day. So now we have talked about what you can do within Canvas to help make sure that your content is accessible in terms of structure and format. I know I didn't talk about all the other elements, including making sure that the font is large enough. I know I haven't talked about things such as quizzes or assessments and forms, but that's something that we will also have an opportunity to talk about. So in terms of creating documents, we included this here because even if your Canvas course content is accessible, if the other information that you're putting in Canvas is not accessible, so those include your handouts, your lecture notes, other readings that you are obtaining from elsewhere. For example, if you are including a PDF document of a scanned book, that is clearly not going to be accessible because in most cases, not most cases, a scanned document is an image. So as a result, that can be quite difficult for screen readers to pick up. So we must make sure that the content that we include in Canvas is accessible. So there are different tools and resources that are available for you. In addition, I have also added another presentation that we did. It's right there, as well as some instructions for what to do. Relevant resources are there as well. Accessibility of third-party resources is also a very critical piece. We obviously are an innovative institution. Our instructors, our professors, our instructional designers, all of us want to create course content that is engaging and that is exceptional. And we are seeing more and more tools that come into the market that are exciting to use. The concern is to make sure that as we adapt some of those tools and resources, that we take into consideration their accessibility. So an example might be if you are interested in using software in your course, to make sure that before you ask students to buy that software or to download that software, to take a quick look at the software and research the accessibility of that software. And this might be a difficult call. It might be a difficult thing to do, but I think it's an essential thing to do, especially if that software is going to be utilized across the board or in multiple courses or throughout the whole program. We need to make sure that we are assessing those instruments and those tools for accessibility. So I've provided some ideas in terms of what we could do. What we recommend is working with our EdTech team, as well as including myself and IT, to, if you are planning to adopt a software or an EdTech tool, so that we can be able to provide some insights in terms of the accessibility of that particular tool or resource. So finally, accessibility tools. In terms of accessibility tools, what we would recommend at the surface level, in addition to doing manual checks, we recommend that you also conduct, we recommend that you utilize the accessibility checker that's already within Canvas. You just simply click edit and go ahead and check accessibility. It is not a perfect accessibility checker, but it does provide a at least some basic accessibility checks. So that's a first step in terms of evaluating your content for accessibility. We also have provided UDoIt, which also provides another additional layer in terms of checking your course for accessibility. So I actually haven't checked this one for accessibility, so I hope the content is accessible, but you would simply click on UDoIt, which is enabled in all of our courses. It might take a few seconds to load. What I might mention about UDoIt is that it does not check files. We are still looking for other tools that are a little bit more comprehensive. We are looking for tools that will also enable us to automate the process in terms of if, for example, we have a document in Microsoft Word or in PDF and we want to automatically change the format to HTML or other formats, that tool can be able to help with those types of things. We want a tool that can also do a little bit better in terms of assessing the accessibility of multimedia. So we are still working on that, but what we have right now is UDoIt, and you can be able to scan your course. Hopefully it takes a few seconds, and hopefully I won't have a lot of errors. I can anticipate that it probably is going to pick up 1 or 2 errors in terms of one of the videos I know didn't have closed captions. It was a YouTube video. 15 errors. Wow. Let's see what the 15 errors are. So it looks like one of the links should contain context. Let's see what that is. But what you can see is that it does show you exactly where the error is. And you can be able to go back. Let's see what it says. Because many users of screenshots use links to navigate the page. Looks like it's saying that we provided text. We provided a link without text. Actually, one of the things that you would notice with UDoIt is that in some cases it will pick up certain things that are not necessarily errors, and it would highlight some of those things. And what we have done is that we have provided, and I'll look into why that's the issue here, but I don't want to dwell on it. What we have also provided is a user guide that provides additional insights in terms of managing the suggestions as well as managing some of the errors. So you can be able to go in and see some of the errors that so link should contain text. We can be able to go in there and find out why that's an error and examples of what that might look like, and how we might be able to deal with that type of error. So with that said, that's what we wanted to be able to cover today. I would mention that we are also in the process of finalizing both instructor-led as well as self-paced courses, such as, it will be better than this one, but different tools and resources that both EdTech as well as my role, we are working on different types of tools and resources that will be available soon. So if there are any questions or concerns, we can also be able to discuss. I promise we'll try to answer them as honestly as we can. And we are lucky to have Sean here too. He's an amazing instructional designer and EdTech professional.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Lord Giddie, for sharing all of your insights and wisdom and examples with us. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we hope to see you next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.